Hi, everybody. Welcome to our deeper conversations on DK Duncan, the life of the man himself. We are going to wait about a minute for persons to come in on the live, but we're happy to have you join us this afternoon on the anniversary of the passing of Donald Keith Duncan, DK. People coming in. Excellent. And we have Tony Bogues and Beverley Manley Duncan here with us. So we can start the conversation as soon as we have a few more on. And we had to make a change because there's a demand from many Facebook account holders for us to be on Facebook with the live, thus the change from Instagram to Facebook. But the good thing is that once we have the content, we can post to both platforms afterwards. Okay. We are ready to go. Well, welcome to everyone to deeper conversations about the life of DK Duncan. Today marks the first anniversary of the passing of the much admired and feared radical DK Duncan. 1 year ago, we lost him to the dreaded COVID-19. But on this anniversary, the first anniversary, we wanted to take time out to recognize his contribution to Jamaica, to the politics and radical Black nationalism more broadly. So today in our conversation, we'll talk about national transformation. We will talk bold ideas. We need some of those. We'll talk about dreams pursued, and to paraphrase Bob Marley, but never attained. What can we still learn from this passionate advocate for economic and social justice? Today, we will have a deeper conversation about this man, DK, and about these issues with Tony Bogues and Beverley Manley Duncan. Anthony Bogues, known as Tony, is a professor of humanities and Africana studies at Brown University. In the 1980s, he was secretary of the PNP's Political Education Commission. That's the People's National Party's Political Education Commission. And he worked in the party's secretariat for a decade. That's what organizes the overall party machinery. He was special assistant to the late Michael Manley from 1989 to 1992. And as a high school and then university student, Tony was a member of the Abeng Group, a Black activist group with national reach across Jamaica. In fact, DK was a leader in that group in the 1960s. Tony is currently writing a book on Jamaican politics, history, and culture, as well as a work titled Black Critique on the history of Black nationalism, anti-colonialism, and the struggles for a just and more humane world. As an author and editor of 8 books, and as a fellow comrade of DK, we look forward to Tony's contribution to the conversation today. Thank you, Tony, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Imani, for asking me to do this. Really is an honor to do
this. Yes, thank you. We also have Beverley Manley Duncan anchoring the conversation today. Beverley is a champion for women's rights and early childhood education. Married to Michael Manley between 1972 and 1993. As the wife of the Prime Minister, she threw herself into the work of transforming the lives of working class Jamaicans and those living in very difficult circumstances. She was no ordinary First Lady. As a former leader, president of the People's National Party's women's movement, she is credited for bringing women's issues to the forefront of the People's National Party's agenda during the 70s, which introduced equal pay for women and paid maternity leave, a law that even big USA don't have today. So many radical actions that continue to reverberate today. Committed to each other for decades, Beverley married DK Duncan in January 2012. She went everywhere with him as he engaged with the people and mobilized political operations and strategy. Beverley and DK were together until he died in September 2020. The last time Bev saw DK was on his way out the door to the hospital. Beverley's life story will be featured in the upcoming documentary entitled Beverley Manley Duncan, Uncensored. And so, as one of DK's daughters, and certainly someone who can testify to the commitment, to the friendship, Tony and Bev are the right people to have this conversation today. My name is Imani Duncan Price, and I'm honored to facilitate this conversation. And thank you to all the persons joining us online. Please feel free to write questions in the thread. We'll do our best to include them in the conversations as well. But let's set the stage for everyone watching. We'll have all different ages. So what made Jamaican politics in the 70s so exciting?
What a lovely question.
That's for you.
And thank you very much for that generous introduction. And just to say at the beginning that everything we did in teams. A team of people came together. So that was one thing that was critical for me, that we had so many people excited about the vision that we had for Jamaica, that we're never short of people who would join us. You know, now you have to stop and think, who can I get enthused about this idea? In those days, people just came, they just came. People left work and came to the secretariat. But I think that one of the reasons people just came is because of the vision we had for Jamaica, which had really come out of decades of research that was done by different people all over the world post their independence. How are we going to find a path to development that works for everyone? Certainly one that works so that the marginalized would have all the necessities of life. That is what drove us. You know, people could live somewhere decent, they could go to school, all those basic rights, human rights.
Yeah.
And so, although sometimes we had setbacks, it never occurred to us that we could stop. I mean, it was just so exciting, and we're all so young. Tony, of course, much younger than me, but I mean, I was like in my late 20s, you know. So it's like you had the energy, and then we had a leader who was out front most of the time, not even walking beside us, very much out front. And even physically, he walked so fast that we had to run to catch up with him. So I would say there was an overall excitement, certainly in the People's National Party and the people who supported the People's National Party. And I put it that way because I think one of the things that became very difficult for us was to recognize the nature of the class struggle. You know, it's like we had we set out a manifesto, you could call it that, principles and objectives, based on a class alliance.
Describe that to me. We made a class alliance.
Meaning there are different social classes in the country, but we were going to draw on all of them in an alliance further to our vision. Of course, that did not work because we began to see problems inside the party, because the party, remember, was founded on a class alliance. So we had all kinds of people in the party. Now, one of the things that Michael felt strongly is that because he was a trade unionist, and the trade unionism is based on consensus, that consensus could work in the politics.
across the country,
couldn't work.
from uptown, downtown, rural, Kingston.
Everybody. But of course, when you say to a family, we're going to have a minimum wage for domestic helpers, immediately the pushback was, well, I now have to employ 2 or 3, because you're also talking about an 8-hour day. I mean, that's the kind of pushback. Or I may have to do some of that work myself as a housewife. So that we began to see the antagonisms, and that these could not be talked away.
Yeah.
But we had a strong, I mean, although we failed so badly in terms of how many people voted for us in 1980, I don't remember the figures now, but the overall voting, a lot of people stood up. And then another thing we didn't anticipate is the extent to which the Americans would fight us, to the extent of even expanding the CIA office in Jamaica. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
We're going to get into a bit of it. It's important to know. Because you need to understand that change doesn't come easy, but you guys felt the need to stand up, physically stand up and take action.
One final thing, Imani, DK, for most of the time, was there as General Secretary. Every now and then you'd have to.
What is a General Secretary? It's a person who don't understand.
Let me tell you now, that secretariat, you have to have a strong secretariat with a strong leader. That's the boss. That's the boss of the activity. Who can just phone Michael and say, listen, you have to get out there right now to that point. Let me tell you why. And he goes out ahead of him and Michael comes in. But you see, all that can't happen unless people own the vision. And we owned it so easily. And we owned it with people who came in from the diaspora. People came home to Jamaica.
To work for Jamaica.
Just to work for Jamaica.
Tony? Your view on what made the Jamaican politics in the 70s so exciting?
It's what Beverley has talked about, the vision. But there was also a thing about Jamaica really being now independent, now had a chance to be independent. The way I like to think of it is that we got independence in 62. Some of us, grew up after 62. And by 1968, the Ethiopians were saying everything crashed. And that particular song of Everything Crashed, I think, signified the ways in which independence did not come to mean anything for the vast majority of ordinary poor Black people in this country. And that what 1972 did with the victory of the People's National Party under Michael's leadership, and with the slogan "Better Must Come," is that it actually galvanized a whole host of people, all the classes, quite frankly, except a few, around the possibilities of better must come. Everybody have a different view of what better must come is. For the person who don't have water in Cascade, in Hanover, better must come mean water. For the woman who works as a domestic help, better must come means a better working condition. So for the workforce, so too for the factory worker. But what I remember, Imani, about the 1972, as a high school student, just about to go into university, it's standing up in Ligani and watching people who are smoking herb and people who are drinking whiskey. And I remember saying to myself at that moment, I wonder how long this can last. I wonder how the herb smokers and the whiskey drinkers will be able to mix together and stay together to try and create a better Jamaica. Because what I think is important is to understand that what the People's National Party was able to do and what Michael Manley was able to do, along with people like DK Duncan, was that they were able to be part of a social movement that began in the mid-60s in this country. Right. In other words, that you can't think about the 70s without thinking about 68, 69, 70, 71, without thinking about the water rod and rats, and to think, therefore, that there is a certain kind of upsurge of ordinary people and of the middle class as well, and that both Michael and Duncan were part of that, effort to change and to do something else, to make this country politically independent. That was
Exactly.
the thing. I mean, everybody talk about decolonization. Jamaica was not decolonized between 1962 and 1972. The real decolonization struggle began in 1972. And it is that struggle from after 300 years or 400 years of colonialism and so on that actually galvanized all people, a lot of people in this country, particularly ordinary Black people and sections of the middle class and sections of the what we call the private sector, until certain things happened and you know what Bev called the class struggle begins to open up.
Emerge. Can I just
yeah,
say one thing, Tony? One of the things that has always stayed with me is that from our founding, we were for some modicum of self-government leading to independence.
From the PNP's founding.
The PNP. Yeah. I think it is unfortunate that Norman Manley, because he had lived with this concept all his life, was not the prime minister who took us into independence. Because the people who took us in had given it little or no thought. And I know I will be criticized for this, but it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, he understood it. So from day one, he would have led a particular kind of movement.
So DK coming out of the 60s, as you say, the kind of fervor, the change, seeing the problem, seeing the issue of Black people, let's just call it straight, right? Being lacking opportunity, can't get the jobs, the good jobs, wages are low. Yes, we're independent, but what are we earning? There's growing inequality. So there's a fodder, not only locally, but internationally as well, as you say. And you talk about the real independence coming 72 onwards when DK joined Michael in that thrust. What would you say are some of the most critical political and social justice achievements in that time?
Before you even come to that, remember by the end of the 60s now, Tony's reminding us, people were really disenchanted.
I know.
I mean, the kind of crowds were drawing on the road with a bandwagon, which was the musicians really joining with us. So Michael would say something, or anybody would say something, and the next thing you know, the song.
Right.
Or sometimes they'd be there in person. Bob Marley, all these great singers that they did.
Yeah.
Because people were so disappointed in that decade after 1962. So the whole atmosphere was primed for us.
But we've had prime atmospheres, but it doesn't mean that actual action occurs.
Yes.
So what enabled critical actions to occur? What was DK's role in that in the 70s? And what were some of the achievements of the overall movement politically and social justice-wise?
And those are fairly well known now. I mean, the first one I remember actually as early as 72 was the increase in the property tax. A lot of people don't remember that. Early in 72, the property tax was one of the first things raised because it was so uneven and low. And the people who owned property were very upset. And you must remember before Michael asked DK to come into the PNP, because he literally asked him, he was in Brownstown doing his dental practice. But at the same thing, and this shows you how complex a person he was, because while he was one of the leaders in the Abeng movement, saying a plague on both your houses, meaning both PNP and JLP don't have nothing to do with it, he was at the same time the main organizer of the campaign, the PNP campaign in that constituency. The candidate was Elon Wilson.
Yes.
So although he wasn't working for the PNP, he was working for this particular candidate because he felt that this candidate
could make a
was
difference.
Progressive and could make a difference. So by the time Michael sent for him, and he just, what can I say?
He dropped everything. This young man who came home in mid-60s as a dentist from Canada, young family, was a radical activist while he was being a dentist, laid on in front of a backside tractor for backside workers and people who had land that weren't being paid for properly before he even joined the politics. Politics is action, right? Not just talk.
Yeah.
He answered Michael's call, saw something in him and in the movement and came. to
said
join.
he didn't even know where he was going to live.
I remember mommy told me that they had to find a place for him in the 70s
Yes.
when they came. But it's that kind of commitment. But Tony.
Yeah, but you see, it is the sign of the kind of commitment and vision and the idea that we could transform and change that made many of us say, okay, we have been trained for this, we have been trained for that, we go to university for this, we go to university for that. But that the most important thing is actually to try and change Jamaican society from the kind of neo-colonial society that it was at that point in time into something else, into really decolonizing the country, to create the real independence that that we needed. So that's I think we have to see Duncan as part of that. There were just so many young people who decided who decided to do that. The second thing, though, I think that is important to understand about Duncan is that it is his capacity for action to translate the vision and the political ideas into concrete political action, both inside the party and outside of the party, that I think was one of his greatest strengths. He had many political gifts, but that was one of them. So therefore, this capacity to sit down and talk to ordinary people for hours and to one-on-one, two-on-two, as many as possible, and then to think organizationally what was necessary at that moment, I think was an extraordinary political gift. And I also think that what is important is that he represented, into my mind, the current that came out of that 1960s cauldron of black people, of black radical, black thinking, and so on. He represented that, and he represented that right until his passing last year. And that inside the People's National Party, what he was is, he would call himself Democratic Socialist, Revolutionary Left, or Revolutionary Democrat, or whatever. But at the heart of that was a certain kind of representation of ordinary black people and what they could achieve and what their aspirations were. And therefore, the struggle was always, how do you make the political party, the movement, the People's National Party, respond to that? How do you transform the party to be that kind of movement that rests upon those aspirations, not rhetorically, but actually in practice? And that
can you take us through just some examples of some of the achievements of the movement in the 70s?
This is taking us a little time to come to the achievements.
Yes.
It's almost tiring.
The reason being, let me tell you why. No, hold on 1 second. Our audience, you guys lived it.
I know.
Right? Most persons actually don't know it. There have been 5 generations, and having set the basis for the environment.
And make sure we come to it. But just before we come to it, and then keep it what Tony was saying now, one of the ways in which, and I think he captured DK beautifully, that thing of turning everything into action, almost seeing the practice while he was still in the theory. Okay, so what was happening now is that he, in addition to those other gifts that he had, he was a Democrat, democratic to the core, and he was for participatory Democrats. Mm-hmm. So the masses of people, their voices must be heard.
They mattered.
They must matter. You must know they matter. And one of the phrases, and Tony knows this, that he loved, was when George Lamy, who is a Barbadian writer, still alive, and somebody who Tony has written about, referred to what he called the intellectual capacity of the masses. Now, when you see grassroots people in that way, intellectual capacity in a situation like Jamaica, where the class thing is so rigid, and in all of us, you're going to say...
And mixed with color.
Well, of course, every time we say class, thank you, we must call. But when you think about it, intellectual, So, and that thing Tony said about he'd speak one-on-one or to two people. Just before he died, I remember we went into a constituency one night to have a group meeting, and when we arrived, there were only two people there, way up in the hills. I didn't even know Jamaica had those hills. I said, "What you going to do? We have to postpone?" He says, "No. If it's two people, we sit with them and we deal with that." So he wasn't waiting on it. You know, most politicians would say,
What a big crowd.
how many, before they reach us, how many people are there? He wasn't interested in that. All right. So now, with this participatory democracy and all what Tony just said, we're able to achieve a number of things. And I must say, we had a kind of leader who just was open. You know, he was going to stop you. You know that you would have his back and he would have your back. So we were able to be very bold. And DK, if nothing else, was bold. He never took anything personally. Not a loss of an election. He would go through with you and analyze it, and everything had to be put in context. So when he got up to speak, we'd all die. And so we're going to be here for a while. And he knows we're all dying. That didn't bother him.
No.
He was going to put it in context.
Yeah.
And you know, this is one of the things that you hardly see now.
Yes.
People don't say that.
And Beverley, regardless of your educational level,
Yes.
he put it in context.
He put it in context.
Whether you have a university degree,
yes,
or you have a primary school
or you're an
certificate.
intellectual from the masses.
Right.
So together we're able to do a number of things, always keeping in mind what the vision was.
Yeah.
Because remember, we're based on, I say we're out there, Freudian slip. The PNP is based on equality and social justice.
Yes.
So we were looking for how we could narrow that gap between the so-called haves and the so-called have-nots, right? So the administration had to do something about education. Prior to that, Norman Manley, through the same process that DK was able to get a scholarship for the parish, was able to have scholarships for far more people. And that means that somebody from the inner city could win, but you still have to pay, right? What we were able to do, that our administration, is to make education free.
Yeah.
So I meet people now who tell me, you know, with pride, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be a dentist or a doctor.
Yeah.
So that we.
Or whose parents wouldn't be this.
Parents
wouldn't have a basis for us to be then stand and go forward as a family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That was a major shift, and you can see how that would help to narrow.
Yeah.
The gap.
Some say it created the middle class in Jamaica.
Yeah. Well,
because before you really had the haves who had a lot.
Yes.
And the have-nots who were many who really had nothing.
Yes.
So at least the education created a path for possibility.
And that's what I'm calling the narrowing of the gap between those who have and those who did not. So that was one of the fundamental
free education.
Free education. Minimum wage.
Yeah.
And to be clear, free up to university level.
Right up to university
level.
Right. I actually participated in that because I went to university late.
So did my mommy. No, it's true.
So that narrowing, what were we doing to narrow? So we had the minimum wage, the 8-hour day for everybody. We had the domestic helpers. They actually were formed initially and operated out of the office of the Bureau of Women's Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had all kinds of things like that. Then you must remember, you know, that cauldron that Tony talks about in the 60s. At the same time, in the late 60s, the women's movement internationally was going through another phase. So, you know, a lot of stuff was going on that we could really, there was a basis for what we did. Not just excitement and the vision, but a basis, a real basis. People want to change. After you get independence, you think you're going to see something different, and you don't see it.
I think if I could just
understand, come with you, Tony.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, just
no, you go ahead.
I just want to add just one law which I think really transformed Jamaica's life, and there's no bastard a day anymore. Right? The bastard act in which children were seen in a certain way, and it's an old colonial law. from the 1800s. When that law was revoked, it freed up many women and children to be able to do certain things. And I think that's really very important.
Can you give some examples, Tony, to explain to people what it was before and what it allowed after?
What was before is that if you were quote unquote an illegitimate, what was called bastard, right? And that was the name that was given. Then you couldn't sign your name to certain things. For example, you couldn't sign your name. You weren't seen as a kind of a legal subject in this country because of the colonial law, right? So that, I mean, there's a person who said to me, you know what that thing did to me, Comrade Bogues, that law did for me? It allowed my mother to actually apply for a house at NHT, National Housing Trust. And National Housing Trust again was a reform of the Manley regime, coming out of his own trade union experience. And then one should just remember things like the bauxite levy. And one should also remember something that is very important.
Could you detail the bauxite levy, Tony, please?
The bauxite levy, in Jamaica, well, not many folks may know this, but Jamaica is one of the world's highest producer of bauxite from 1959 thereabouts, right? Up until fairly recently. We never got any major taxes on the bauxite company. It just wasn't happening. It's part of the things of the 60s, and it's not just Jamaica, quite frankly, is many so-called ex-colonial countries who had resources like Guinea and so on in Africa. And what happened is that the companies would come in and they would basically take the red dirt out of the earth. The farmers would be devastated. They wouldn't pay you enough taxes, etc., etc. And then they're gone about their business, right? And what the PNP did with the bauxite levy was to insist that what had to happen is that you had to pay a higher rate of taxes. A simple thing, taxes. I mean, if you're in any business across the world, you pay taxes. I mean, it's not it's not a magic thing.
Yeah, it's a basic thing.
In business, you have to pay taxes, and you're supposed to pay a certain level of taxes, but depending on what it is that you're doing. So that I think is important. The way I like to sum up the 1970s is not my phrase, is really the phrase of Rex Neckerford, is that it is a Semanitization of Jamaica. And that Semanitization of Jamaica, that business of people having dignity, is not something that you can put your finger on and say, okay, this is a reform that whatever. But it is something that is fundamental to all human beings, and particularly for Black human beings who come out of slavery and colonialism. Right? And I think this is one of the things we need to think about. Somebody just asked in chat, what is a bastard? It is an illegitimate child that. And what is interesting to me is that people can ask that in 2021. That shows
a great time.
Tremendous shift.
By the way, bastard, they were referred to as outside children.
Yes.
They were outside. So like when the father or the mother died, the children inside the family were taken care of. The outside child was not entitled to anything. And I want to say one thing about the bauxite. As we mentioned earlier, DK was involved with Hugh Small and Holy Provide and some other people to make sure that the land that the people were selling to the companies, they were getting value for it.
Yeah.
And as we talk, I would like people listening and even to remind myself of the struggles that we had to go through. A lot of the bad name that we get for the 70s is involved with the struggles that we had to go through to make all these things possible. The bauxite levy, there was heavy opposition internally in Jamaica. Michael had to mobilize about 5 heads of state. He brought them all here, and this brings to mind that our struggle was never seen as a local struggle.
Yes.
It was a national, regional, and international struggle. That is what our foreign affairs was based on.
Yeah.
So, and remember too, we're in the middle of the Cold War. Okay, meaning major opposition between the then Soviet Union
And
and
the
the
USA.
United States of America. And to survive, many of us, went one way or the other way. Now, we went with a non-aligned movement, which was not aligned to either, which gave us the right
Yes.
to
Choose your own path.
yes,
Yeah.
and
Negotiate
that's not-
on your own terms.
but that was also dangerous.
Yes.
So increasingly, as the USA watched us and sent more of their people inside Jamaica, they knew what you were going to do, because there were people even inside our party,
Yeah.
who would talk against us. Giveaways. I mean, let me just say something.
Mhm.
I got a list from a tertiary student in America who sent me some cables that were at the time highly classified.
Right.
They had just become declassified. And he took out a court thing and he went and he got it. And let me tell you, you should have seen, they blocked out, they call that redacted,
Yes.
the names of the people they were talking to inside the PNP, who told them what we're really doing was communism, or, because you had that
Who
fight.
named it communism?
Yes, we had that. Look, in almost every executive, there's one person, he's not alive now, who always got up, a senior leader, and said, Mr. Party Leader, is the party going till we could all say it with him. As he got up, you could do it like a chorus. Is the party going communist?
Well, so two questions then. Was DK communist? Because they said he was a leader of this move to the left. I have an answer, but your answer.
I have an answer.
Give us the answer.
I don't know if Tony has an answer. But
I have an answer, but you go, Bev, please.
fabulous. I mean, I don't know what to call it. It had to achieve hell of a tempo.
Yes.
Okay.
With
You
passion
could
comes temper.
He had tempo. He had passion and he had tempo. He could be very warm and loving and so caring. But on the other hand, you ask him the question, are you a communist? And he was going to knock you flat. I don't mean that figuratively. I mean that really happened. Don't ask him that question. He did not regard himself as a communist. He was never a communist. He didn't have any special sort of affinity with the Cubans. I mean, he was talking about non-aligned.
Aligned to participatory democracy, as they say.
Yes.
The revolutionary Democrats,
Yes.
as Tony spoke about earlier.
Yes, that's what he called himself. And but he liked, although he was part of a tribe, he was not part of a tribe. You understand?
Yeah.
He was a critical part of the PNP, but really hated tribalism and just knew that we could not attain the vision with the tribalism that was in place.
In the politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Tony.
that my response to that, Imani, is that DK couldn't be a communist, and because DK, in the kind of Marxist-Leninist, Stalinist sense, because DK was too much of a Democrat. In other words, for DK, the question of elections, the questions of the capacity of the ordinary people, not the party, the question of the ordinary people to participate, to build different kinds of democratic structures. People call it participatory. I think that he was a bit beyond participatory. I think if he could construct a direct democracy kind of society, that's what he could. That's what he would have. So I don't. So he was. What he was that he was radical, and he was revolutionary. He was revolutionary because the society needed to be transformed from what it was, a class, color, racial order with a certain kind of oligarchy that controlled the society at that time, and that you had to change. You had to change it. It couldn't go on that way, and you couldn't live in a place like that, in a society where where there were so much what people used to call themselves at that time, so much sufferers. You couldn't do it. You could do it if you want, but you will be inhuman. And if there's one thing about Duncan, is that he was one of the most humane persons I know, with a fiery temper, but with one of the most humane persons I know. And you could see it in his dental work, the way he practiced dentistry, quite frankly. And the way he treated the particular kids and so on, and people who would, poor people who came into that office to fix teeth. Right? You could see it, and you could see it on the way he would talk to people, ordinary people. And the temper would be not just about communism, was that if you do something wrong against the people, and if you do it wrong and you don't know you do it wrong, he would talk to you. But if you do it wrong maliciously, that is when the temper would explode.
You feel the fire.
Yes.
No, it's important because so much of what you have shared parallels today. The power of multinational corporations and the power that countries can take, like with the bauxite levy, to say you can't just extract. You need to give us back something so we can invest in our people and move forward. Very critical to understand that kind of contribution from the 70s. In fact, Daddy was on that same commission, the bauxite levy commission, because it was critical. Understanding as well.
And you see, he was not diplomatic.
Sorry.
And being generous.
No, straight talking.
Not in the family, not in the politics. He called it as he saw it. And he would expect to get an argument from you. And at the end of it, everybody was fine. And you could say to him, look, have you noticed that so-and-so is not speaking to you? He said, oh yes, what happened? I said, you don't remember the other night when you had the, oops. You don't remember the other night when you had this quarrel that almost ended in a fight and you said certain things?
Yes.
And that person is offended. He said, but why? We're just having an argument. That's all it was. It was just an argument. But he was never diplomatic. So, and this also applied to the politics, as I said earlier. So in the rhetoric now, there are things he would say that would offend people. And remember, Tony, as Tony was talking, I remember that we used to call the oligarch, we used to call them the 21 families, because somebody on campus.
I was going to ask you, what is the oligarchy?
Yes, somebody on campus had done some research on the 21 wealthy families in Jamaica and actually named them.
Okay.
So you know that was not so nice either. There are a number of things we did, which looking back, I can see how certain people would have been offended and even left the country.
Right.
And want him out of the party. Yeah. There was an element inside and people outside who wanted him out of the party. And I remember, if you go back to Sir Arthur Richards, who was a governor, British governor, before we were he was still governor when the party was founded. And he and Norman Manley became, I don't want to say good friends, but they would meet and have a drink in the evening and talk about Jamaica and so on and so forth. And he once put the question to Norman Manley, why do you keep the left wing inside the party? Because from then, the Americans were watching us.
From in the 40s?
From the
40s and 50s.
Was founded,
yes.
And we were being seen as communists from that time. You have people like Richard Hart. And
yes, of course, the H's.
Who were expelled.
Can you show who the H is? This is the names of the H's so that the persons can understand?
Let me see if I can remember. Oh, no, Richard Hart.
Yes.
Tony would remember. I don't remember that.
We can put it on today.
The
last names was H.
Yes. No, why I brought that up is because when the governor said to him, why don't you
expel
them? He said, if I expel them, because he saw them as hardworking and the work, they're doing a lot of work. He said, if I expel them, what will happen is the party could be taken over, and this is a quote, by the sometimes sleepy center. Sleepy center. You take the left wing out of the party, which is where a lot of study was going on, the ideological thing was raging, and you get the sleepy center. You just become like anybody else. What's the difference? What's the difference in you? Do you really believe in equality and social justice? And to get to equality and social justice, there are certain things we can do immediately.
To make changes.
Towards that equality and social justice. education, as I mentioned earlier, was one. Minimum wage was one. The bastard there again.
NHT,
NHT
National Housing
was
Trust.
one, because it was not just ad hoc programs, you know. It was being done further to a promise of a country that could really set an example for how people, the different social classes, can live together. As I always said, but if I send Natasha to the best schools, that's one thing. What about the child coming from Frenchtown?
Yeah.
What's the point if she's going? And that's what has happened in a large case, because many of those children who were educated in the top and higher schools are overseas. Why would they be here?
So it takes us to the question today. What lessons can we apply from all that you've shared regarding DK, his approach, regarding the vision, the movement, building that cohesive Jamaica, so that persons actually come back to Jamaica and want to invest and build in droves versus leave?
Many of those students have stayed. But I'm saying, if you see
but
the society,
today we have Jamaicans leaving.
Of course.
So I ask you, what would you recommend that we could take on, how we could move forward, taking some of the lessons of the past?
Tony, you want to start? You're chairing a powerful commission.
No, I think the first thing is actual political courage. As trite as that sounds, is political courage.
That's where I was going to start.
Yeah, the capacity to face the reality of the society, the way the society is structured, the problems in the society, and to name them loudly and to say we're going to do something about it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to be bold. You don't lose anything by being bold. You lose more by being timid, quite frankly, right? Because people think, sure, kind of weak business that, man. That don't make no sense, right? And it's better you be bold, and then people quarrel with you about being bold, and then you can have an argument about what it is. What is it you're doing? The third thing is to always understand the context that you are in. That requires, Imani, and I know this is hard for many comers and many people. That requires not know a kind of social argument and a play around with social media and so on. It actually requires a certain kind of study, an attention to what the society is and to what the world is that we currently inhabit. And then I think the other thing is a commitment to action, and a commitment to action to change, and to realize something, right? And this is what I think, to realize two things. One, that if you have a vision, you have to walk the talk. You can't have a vision about equality and social justice and all those things, and you're not walking the talk. People kind of look back and say, but how am I talk about this and how should I talk about that? But me see this, right? So you have to be able to walk the talk. And I think the other thing is that besides having a certain kind of courage, then you have to be able to understand, and this I know is going to be controversial, but this to me is one of the deep lessons of the 1970s, that if you are going to make change in a society like Jamaica, even if you're working with a class alliance, which I think we need to work with, I believe in that. And I believe that you have to have progressive people from all walks of life in it. There are going to be moments when you're going to mash corn. And when you mash corn, you have to decide in whose interest are you mashing the corn. And if you're mashing corn in the interest of ordinary people, then you have to have the political courage to stand up for that. And those, to me, are some of the things I understand. I take from Comrade Duncan, and I actually take from the left in the People's National Party, including Comrade Manley. But it is, and sometimes people don't do that. I mean, you know, nobody's perfect, really, quite frankly. But this business of understanding something we never quite understand. How when you match corn, what do I mean? When you do a property tax, even if it is equal, even look just and equal, those who are affected by it are going to make up noise. When in 76, 77, the People's National Party supports Cuba in Angola, around the question of apartheid and how you get rid of apartheid because the South Africans are coming up north. That is a standing up. But when you do that, you're going to mush American corn. And America's corn is going to say you're trying to do something. So you always have to think about those things. But to me, you can't have political principles. You can't talk about political courage. And I'm not saying you must just do these things and create chaos. That's not my point. But that's a careful study all the while of these things and to realize that what you are doing to transform something is always going to create a little difficulty. So you have to have the courage to stand by what you wanted.
And I want to support you fully. Tony, I was going to start off with being bold. Either you believe in the vision, that you own it and you take responsibility for it, or you don't. So you have to make this thing of upsetting people. Okay, it's all right to upset somebody if you're in the struggle towards this bigger vision. And one of the things I learned about vision is that it's not something out there, you know. While it is out there, though, you have to start living it now. It's like the house you surround yourself in. Mm-hmm. So to what extent what I'm going to do or say is going to further the vision or not. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, what you get is sus. No, that's when the space comes in to put all kind of storytelling and each one feed on another one. And before you know it, your party is dissipating. One of the things I like.
And the country doesn't move forward.
The country, it's just like this. Now, the one I wanted to mention too was political education. Mm-hmm. I think we should have it in the curriculum in the schools. We should know about.
Can you define political education,
Political education, meaning, first of all, in my mind, it would be making everybody in Jamaica know what a citizen means. What do I take responsibility for as a citizen of Jamaica? So I know I should pay my taxes. I know I should get involved in civil society groups, advocacy groups. We don't have any sense of that. We need to understand what it means to be a Jamaican. You know, Orlando Patterson, the Harvard professor,
who has Jamaican origins.
Jamaican origins. His latest book is The Confounding Island. And that is something I think we could use in Jamaica to show the possibilities that exist here. All the things that are showing up in this little so-called little country, almost a dot on the map of the world. And yet we're just out there. You don't go anywhere and not see a Jamaican, and a proud Jamaican at that. Now, one of the things, that's the last thing I'll say, one of the things we learned in the international feminist movement, in particular the American feminist movement, is that we ask what is political education. You must work on people's consciousness. Mm-hmm. Get the consciousness level up to a certain stage that people can be what Tony's talking about, or what I'm talking about. That you can be bold. It's like it comes from inside of you. So you put in that education for action. You can make a speech, and motivate, as you and I know we can do. And people feel good. 5 minutes later, they say, what did you learn from Beverley or Imani or Tony? And they say, Or you can make a speech. That is an action. That is a speech that is going to move you to do something towards the vision. And that's the kind of consciousness, the Black consciousness, the African consciousness, which we tend to put under the table. But that's who we are.
Yeah.
And until we know who we are, we're going to continue standing in the same place and thinking we're moving.
And we're not.
And we're not.
Beverley, share with me, as we close, the line from War. Bob Marley.
I keep forgetting. Let me tell you, Tony, last night I was thinking about DK and say if I was to sum up the vision of DK and the
his essence. His essence.
The essence of DK and the 1970s. I would go to Bob Marley's song, War.
Wow.
And language is important. As I repeat the quote, I'm going to ask everybody listening to just think of the language in that song, which is based on the speech that Haile Selassie did at the United Nations. Until, even that beginning, until, that means it's not happening yet. Until the philosophy, because it is a philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior. Let me tell you, that superiority thing is heavy enough.
Yeah.
There's some countries and people who just feel they're superior and another inferior. Go on your turn.
Until the philosophy, which holds one race superior
and another inferior,
is finally
and permanently
abandoned.
Not yet. By abandoned is the last one. There's one that comes before
discredited.
Discredited.
The process of actually showing the fallacy.
Discredited. This is why I've really paid an attention now to those words. Discredited. And it goes up there,
And then
abandoned.
Everywhere is
what? War. And we're seeing war in Jamaica. We're seeing war all over the world. But make us look at Jamaica. It is war. It is war. And that is where I think we stood, whether we realize it or not, in that powerful place.
Whether it is figurative war or real war, is a fight against that system. Which still exists today.
Yes. War widely defined.
Yes. What a conversation befitting of DK Duncan. The kind of depth, because he was an intellectual of no mean order. Let me tell you.
Call him that.
No, the man could read.
A lot of people did not refer to him as an intellectual.
Yeah, I know.
The first time I heard him referred to as intellectual, it really reached me. It was just good to hear it named. He was an intellectual.
Yeah. I mean, deep study, understanding parallels of systems historically and contemporary to see who we are. To then put praxis, the theory, into action.
Okay.
What a conversation. Tony, Bev, you did. Your friend, your husband, our comrade, my father.
Oh, and we're ready to cry, so let's wrap this up.
You didn't proud.
Do I need to wrap it up for you?
No, I can do it. The man, his principles, the action was well embodied today and I think well communicated. And I will say there was a summary that we came up with as children last year. Mm-hmm. We said DK Duncan, a radical stand for truth, equality, justice, and love. I hope today's deeper conversation on the life of DK Duncan and the kind of potential transformation that began, but much work to be done, fuels a fire in everybody who listened this afternoon. Do what you can with what you have, where you are. We are who we have been waiting for. It's nobody else but you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One love, one heart.
One love, Tony.
One love.
One love.
One love.
Thank you, everybody.